Well, hey there. This is Kim Bellafato from the Madison County Public Libraries. We're back with our newest episode of Spice Club, where we feature an individual spice for the month and cook up a recipe to give you some ideas of how to use it. So this month's spice is curry, which I have located right here. Curry often has kind of a distinctively yellow color. But a funny thing that most people don't realize about curry is actually a blend of spices. It isn't a single individual spice like many of the other ingredients that we've featured. And curry actually doesn't have a specific recipe. So sometimes when you're cooking with curry, you have to shop around a little bit to find a blend that makes you happy, that has flavors that you like. But curry tends to be a blend. There are some common spices. Its distinctive yellow color comes from turmeric. You might have guessed that. Other items that are often in there, cumin is very often in there. Bay leaf. Usually there's something kind of earthy, whether it's cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, something that has that kind of flavor. I'm looking at my little list because there can be a lot of other options. The amount of pepper in it can vary as well. So sometimes it has black pepper, sometimes it has ginger, sometimes the hot version of curry has cayenne in it. And so that tends to give it a fairly strong flavor. And then you can find unique ingredients. Mine in particular has something called fenugreek, which is an unusual spice, kind of hard to find at your local grocery store. So as I said, you're going to want to try it, see if you like the combination that there is. And if you don't, there's always another version of it to give a try. So I have a brand that I like in particular. And so that's typically what I use. And it's what I've offered you all for your spice sample. But if your tastes are different than mine, that's totally okay. So there are some funny things about curry. Most people tend to think curry is an Indian spice and that it relates to Indian dishes. Well, interestingly, in India, you are very unlikely to see curry powder like we offer as an ingredient in a recipe. The base spices might be in there. You might see some of those specific ingredients, but the blend of curry powder itself is a shortcut. At the time of, I guess, probably British colonization, there was an attempt to recreate some of the flavors found in India. And so the curry spice blend was sort of born from that. Much easier to mix and have available to try and recreate some of the flavors. But where people think they're cooking a dish or a traditional Indian dish using curry powder, that's not actually the case. And to add even more interest to that, curry in Asia and other countries tends to mean a stewed dish. And so we tend to equate a curry as containing curry, but also containing a meat and vegetables and a gravy in some sort. So when you're searching online, if you decide that you like this idea of a curry, you have to look really closely at what it is that you're finding. Does it include curry as an ingredient, or is it a curry, which means more of a stewed dish? So in the spirit of that, the dish that I've selected for us today came and made that travel. It traveled from India to England and then from England to us. And now you'll find it in most Southern cookbooks. The name I think that we call it here would be Country Captain Chicken. And, I'm not sure the evolution of the name, but it tends to be a more like a stewed chicken. In Italy, it'd probably be close to a cacciatore or something like that. But it includes some of the ingredients that we have here today. And so I'll sort of walk you through what we've got laid out. So I have chicken here today. And when I tend to do a chicken stew, I like to do a variety of parts, some white meat and some dark meat, because I think that gives great flavor. Nobody eats drumsticks anymore at my house, so we tend to use chicken thigh and chicken breast together. If you had a whole cut up chicken, that'd be perfect. You just do the parts and combinations that you like, and it goes in whole pieces. But in the stewing process, a lot of times it's going to cook down almost to the point that it's falling apart. I certainly have cooked it to a point that I had to pull out bones or whatever prior to serving, just because the meat had fallen off the bone. I have chopped onion here. I have chopped peppers. I typically use red peppers or orange peppers, yellow peppers. They have nice color to them, and I'm not a green pepper fan personally, unless it's a jalapeno, so I avoid those. And I've got almost a full head of parsley here that I've chopped up fairly fine. So those are gonna cook together. I have bacon that I've chopped into small pieces. The recipe called for slab bacon, which is kind of hard to buy in our area. So what I did was I went to the grocery store and bought what they call irregular slices of bacon. So instead of the really thin pieces that you can do, these tend to be a little thicker. And I have discovered that the cheaper bacon has more meat on it. So unless my sole goal is bacon fat, I'm always happy to get it where it has a little bit more bacon in there. And so we have our spices as well. We have another unique spice that you're going to get introduced to that's called mace. This is an Indian spice, and it has sort of a sweet and spicy flavor in it that's going to really take our dish to the next level. I have my curry powder that's here, as I said. I have paprika. We're going to use that for seasoning our chicken, and a little bit of thyme, salt and pepper. I have garlic that will go into the sauce, crushed tomatoes. And then in the last 30 minutes or so of the simmer, we're going to add some currants into that recipe. If you like raisins better, you could totally add a small amount of raisins in there. I had currants and I like currants better, so I have it. And we're also going to toast some almonds just to kind of put across the top. Country Captain's usually served with white rice. So if you can imagine a dish, you've got your white rice, your chicken with gravy on top, and then you can add this nice little crunchy topping on there, and it has really good texture. And I have flour for doing a dredge for our chicken. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. The first thing that we're going to be doing as we're working on this is I'm going to go ahead and start rendering our bacon down. I've got a frying pan over there that I've started warming. So I'm going to put my bacon in there, plus about 2 tablespoons of butter, just to get that ready for cooking up our vegetables. So, pop that butter into the pan, let it start melting. I can set that to the side. I'm going to add the bacon to my pan. Let that get all nice and happy in there. And I'm kind of working in both places today. I don't always do that. Turn my heat up just a little bit. Sorry, as I'm dealing with my controls a little. And I've got a big stew pot that's over there as well that'll be part of our recipe. So the first things that we're going to cook up, I'm going to render that bacon and butter, and then we're going to actually add the parsley, the onions, and the peppers in there together. And while those are cooking up, then what I'll do is prepare the dredge for our chicken. And dredge is usually, it's not like fried chicken where you put an intentionally crispy coating on it. A dredge typically is just seasoned flour on either side. I tend to like that in a recipe. I think that it makes a nice crust on the meat, but it also helps do a little bit of thickening into a gravy, and it helps a gravy hold on to the chicken. It bonds with that flour coating. And so we've got those parts and pieces that are getting ready to happen. So I'm gonna do what I often do, and I'm gonna hit pause real quick. The bacon will probably take about maybe 3-4 minutes to go ahead and render down. So we've got that nice bacon fat to use. So I'll be right back with you as soon as that happens. So I'll see you in just a minute. So I've given my bacon a little jump start on the vegetables. By rendering bacon, that means we're cooking off the fat and letting that be the fat for frying things up. So I'm going to add our ingredients. So I've got our parsley. And then I'm going to add our peppers and our onions in there as well. And I'm going to give that a stir. So this has really nice color when you look at it, the green of the parsley with the red and the orange of the peppers and the white of the onions. And of course, bacon makes everything beautiful. So we've got all that kind of happening in here. As I often do, I'm going to kind of watch the fat level and see if I need to add just a little bit more butter in there to accommodate this large pile of vegetables we've got going on. I'm going to need a little bit of that fat for cooking the chicken as well. And so the vegetables and the bacon will give some nice flavor to the fat as I go to cook that chicken. I do think I'm going to add just a little bit more butter into that. I feel like my vegetables are going to stick a little bit. So I'm adding about 2 tablespoons more directly into the pan. Let that melt down in there, and I'm going to keep the rest of that butter back just in case it seems like we need that. Set all my dishes to the side. So while we're watching that and keeping an eye, I'm going to go ahead and mix up my dredge. Goodies I don't need to later aside. And so, yeah, this is just a seasoned flour. And in our case, primarily it's going to be flour, salt, pepper, and paprika. And paprika, we've used that one as a featured spice before. It gives nice color. It gives just a little bit of its own flavor in there. So I'm sort of eyeballing this, and I've got about 1.25 cups of flour. I can always make some additional dredge if I need it. And I'm going to eyeball the paprika. Maybe about a tablespoon. I'm going to see what that looks like. Oop, I bounced a piece in there. And then salt and pepper. And salt is important when you're cooking with meat. It tends to seal the outside of the meat, and it's very important for the flavor overall. All right, a little bit of pepper. And the one thing I didn't bring over here was a fork. Let me grab that. So just taking the fork and mixing it in, and what I'm doing really is looking at that flour and making sure it's got a little color to it. You know, plain flour by itself on chicken would not be very delicious. And that paprika does that little bit. I feel like I maybe need just a smidge more salt in there. The paprika and the pepper look good. All right, so before I start dredging that chicken, I'm gonna give my vegetables a stir since I threw that extra butter in there. Melting down well. And this cooking of the vegetables in a full pan like this could take as long as 15 minutes. You want it fairly softened and all for the flavors to kind of meld together. So I move it around, but I'm also spreading it around kind of flat within that pan just to make sure it has a good edge to it. Turn my temperature up a smidge. All right. My workspace out of the way. So what I'm going to do is take my chicken and just give it a quick dredge in the flour, and then I'm going to set it on my plate here to the side just to ensure it's ready for us when we're going to fry, because that'll be the next step overall, is frying up our chicken. When I went to the grocery store today to get chicken, I was surprised to find usually in a recipe like this, I get chicken with skin on. I think the fat from the chicken skin tends to give you a really nice flavor in your sauce. And the chicken breasts there today, there was none with skin on. So I had to do both boneless and skinless, which would not have been my first choice in this recipe. For you, do it what makes you happy and what your family prefers. But often when you're stewing, bones just add flavor to the broth and makes it a little bit easier for moving things around. So I would have liked to have had bones for the chicken breast, but it was not meant to be. So for our family, I've got 3 breasts here. And sometimes when I'm serving, if they haven't already fallen apart in the pot, I'll cut the breasts in half and to create kind of uniform sized pieces, makes it a little easier for serving up. And so everything's just getting a nice little flour coating. All right, I've done my breasts. I'm going to go stir those vegetables real quick, and then I'm going to get the thighs. Looking good over here. I do have a sense that I'm going to be adding fat to the pan in order to fry up my chicken, but I think the flavor is going to be super nice for this. All right, so spread it out again. Back to our chicken. I just try and be efficient time-wise, so while something is simmering, if I can be getting some of the other steps done, I think it's helpful to be able to do that. I'm also a dishwasher in between, so when we hit pause and I step away, often I step over to the sink just to wash my dishes as I go. I try to contain the chaos in the kitchen. All right, so my chicken thighs that I bought do have skin on. When you fry something skin on, typically I recommend starting skin side down. Again, it sort of helps you render some of the fat on the chicken that has such nice flavor. Crisp it up a little bit. And our goal is not going to be to cook the chicken all the way through. Because this is going to be stewed, really what we're trying to do is make the skin where it exists a little bit crispy and to kind of brown it up, give some color, because chicken in a pot isn't going to brown. You know, it's going to cook, it's going to be completely cooked, safe, good to eat, but lacking that little bit of color that gives such nice flavor. So I have two of what may be the largest chicken thighs I have ever seen and two rather small sized ones. That'll work out nice. My quantity on my dredge is plenty. You know, sometimes you sort of ration it to not have to waste the flour or throw it out afterwards, but you do want to have enough to get a really good coating on there. And I'm tucking the thigh skin back over the thighs. You know how sometimes they get folded up in the package. And so to give it that nice bit of crispness, I don't want it to be clumped up. I want it to be fairly uniform. All right, so my chicken is ready to go. Get this last piece, make sure I got all the little nooks and crannies where I can tuck in a little flour for flavor. All right, so my chicken is going to be ready. My vegetables look like they might need maybe another 5 to 7 minutes to cook down. So I'll take a moment, clean up what I've got going on here while they're finishing up, and I'll be right back with you when it's time to move the vegetables into the pot and start browning up our chicken. So I'll see you in just a couple of minutes. Well, hey there, I'm back. And as you see, I've got my pot here in front of me. So while we were separate, I went ahead and dumped the vegetables with the bacon into the bottom of this pot. So this is the beginning of our sauce. If I had been just making a sauce and not looking to cook the chicken in the rendered bacon, fat, and butter, I would have just gone ahead and done the vegetables straight in this pot. It gives a nice little crust down on the bottom and adds a little bit of extra flavor. After adding everything in here, I did make the decision that there was not nearly enough fat in my pan for taking care of frying up the chicken. So what I did was I took a couple of pieces of bacon, the fattiest ones in my pack, chopped them up like I had done the original bacon, and put them into my frying pan with 2 tablespoons of butter. So I've got the fat in here rendering, and so rendered bacon just tends to cook down really to almost nothingness. I haven't pulled it out of the pan yet because my pan, when you're rendering, a lot of times you don't do it on a real super high heat. And so while we're sitting here visiting, I'm letting that bacon fat cook down just that little bit more. So I'm going to real quick add our other ingredients into the sauce and get that on to start simmering. So to this, I'm going to add my can of tomatoes. And this is crushed tomato, which is a little different than a tomato sauce or a tomato paste. Tends to have a mostly only be tomatoes with no added ingredients, but a fairly nice smooth consistency, which is nice when you're making a sauce. To that, I'm going to add our spices. So I need to add a tablespoon of mace, and I'm using a teaspoon of mace, and I'm using my half teaspoon as the measure because I know it'll fit in the jar. So 2 half teaspoons are going in there. That has a really nice smell to it. I'm going to give some thought to some other ways to use that spice. I have my curry, star of the show, and we're going to use 2 teaspoons for that. So you're going to see me scoop 4 half teaspoons in there. Try and level that. 2, 3, 4. There we go. And as with a lot of recipes, when we go to add the salt and pepper, it's just salt and pepper to taste. For the thyme, you could use fresh thyme if you have it. I had dried handy, and because this is simmering, it's going to be nice. So if I was using fresh, I'd use a tablespoon. My equivalent is about, I guess, close to half that amount with using dried thyme. I don't want it to take over this dish. So I'm going to give that just a good mix all together. Get those vegetables all incorporated in with the tomatoes. Smells very nice. And ultimately, our chicken is going to be simmering in this pot. So again, as it cooks down, they're going to release their juices, and that's just going to add to the sauce. So while I'm cooking up my chicken, I'm going to put this on the back burner to simmer, and I'm going to cook it for about 10 or 15 minutes before I add in my garlic. This recipe calls for that garlic to be added in a little bit later, which will give it a stronger flavor of garlic. If it cooks longer, it tends to mellow a little bit. And so in our case, we're looking to not mellow. So I'm going to get my pot relocated. I'm going to check the temperature real quick on my chicken, and we're going to be ready to start frying it up. So I'll see you in just a second. Hey there. So I've got my pot back on the stove starting to simmer before we add that garlic in. And I pulled out the last little bacon scraps out of my frying pan and have increased that temperature. So the next thing that we're going to be doing is frying up this chicken. And if you remember, I said we're going to put the thighs that have skin in skin side down. That's going to add a little bit more flavor to our oil. And I'm going to do them first. So they're going right into that nice fat that's in there. See if I can get all my thighs in at one time. A lot of times you don't want to crowd your pan because then it takes the temperature down a little bit. So all my chicken is not going to fit in at the one time. It actually looks like I'm going to do 3 thighs and a breast to have room in there. So my goal with the chicken, as I said, is not to cook it all the way through. I'm going to brown up the pieces, get some nice color on that, set them to the side. And once all my chicken pieces are complete, then they're going to go into that sauce. We'll be about ready at that point in time. So I'll be browning up and you stay tuned, and then we'll pull this dish together. So I'll see you just here in a few minutes. Hi friends, we're back. And so I have before me some nicely browned chicken. So while we were apart, our vegetables have been simmering. About 15 minutes in, I added a clove of garlic. As I said, that was kind of a late addition. I added the salt and pepper I neglected to add when I did the other spices. I don't go too crazy with the salt and pepper for 2 reasons. One, we've seasoned this chicken. It has both been salted and peppered, and we've got bacon in there. You can always add a little additional salt if you feel like the sauce needs it at the end, but you can't take it away. So I tend to cook a sauce anyway and then taste it not too long before serving just to see if I need to make any adjustments. So I will be looking at that for salt and pepper just one more time before serving. So in the browning up of my chicken, I always try and offer you any little cooking tips that I have. You want a pan that's hot, but because we were frying in bacon fat and butter, there's kind of a balance on that. You don't want your butter to burn or to darken to a point that it would be bitter. So it takes just that little bit longer to fry and get a nice crispiness. Also, when you have dredged something in flour, You don't want to handle it too much. So as it goes in that pan, you're going to put it in there and you're going to leave it alone. It'll release from the pan about the point that it's brown. Moving it too much, there's that tendency you could leave that crust on the bottom of the pan instead of on your chicken. And so you don't want to be separating those parts. And again, with frying, you always kind of watch as you go. With my first batch, I did a little look of my oil to make sure, one, it was sufficient. I would have added more butter if it had needed it, or a little bit of canola oil if I'd felt like that was necessary. But you also watch for little burned bits in the bottom of that oil. That doesn't taste nice. It would adhere to your second batch. I was fortunate I didn't have that, but that is just something as you're frying with flour that you want to watch for that. When you're doing multiple batches, more than just the two that we had here today, I will often change out my oil, especially if I start seeing kind of a glaze at the bottom of the pan that's turning darker brown of flour that's come off the meat and is starting to burn in the bottom. Always best to change it out and do fresh oil. That is not a good taste. So my chicken is ready to go into the sauce. And so it'll get added into my sauce pot. Where it will simmer for, I'm going to estimate 90 minutes. It could be as much as 2 hours. It's a fair amount of chicken. In the last 30 minutes or so, we're going to take our currants, as I said, and I'm going to add about a handful. I think the recipe measurement might be half a cup. Again, if you had raisins, that would totally work. It just adds a little sweetness on the backside of tomatoey vegetable-based sauce that tastes really nice. The other thing that I did while the vegetables were simmering and I was frying, keeping an eye on those vegetables, I felt like my canned tomatoes or crushed tomatoes were a very thick batch of them. And so I added about a cup of water into my sauce. When you're cooking up your vegetables, if you notice that your tomatoes are starting to stick to the bottom of the pot, one, watch your temperature, but also you can always add a little broth or a little bit of water to it. It's just going to add to the flavor of the sauce and stir up those little brown bits that you've created before they burn. So you'll want to keep a good eye on that. I'll keep the same eye on it while my chicken is simmering and determine if it looks like I need to add a little bit more liquid. The goal is not to be a soup. It should be fairly thick. But again, you don't want to have a layer burning on the bottom that then is going to flavor your whole batch. So you'll keep a kind of an eye on it as you go. I'll know this chicken is done when I can kind of poke it and it's very soft, very tender, not a chewy piece of chicken. It should really be nearly falling apart, but flavorful and soaking up all those juices. So these are going to go in. They're going to be a 90-minute simmer. Again, I'm going to add currants right near the end. And in that same time frame, I'm going to take my sliced almonds. I'm going to put them on a cookie sheet at a real low temperature, maybe 275. And I'm just going to give them a little toast. Again, you'll watch it. They should just turn a nice goldeny brown color, not a dark brown, because you don't want to burn them. That would be yucky. And when I go to serve, I'll sprinkle that over the top and it makes a really pretty serving. So I'll post a picture of what the finished dish looks like, and I hope that you enjoy it and the other recipes we have to offer, and that you have a good time exploring curry, which is a very different kind of spice, but a great way to introduce a different flavor into your kitchen. So I hope you have a great rest of your week. I'll talk to you soon.